Remind you, and for my role, I welcome everybody, dear colleagues and guests. Today is the 30th of November 2021, 2:03 Moscow time. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of Thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich for degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571 Ontology and Theory of Cognition, conflict analytics, ontological and epistemological aspects. The order of the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University Gnotov Alexander Valentinovich, dated the 28th of August 2021, number 8212/1, me, Diakov Alexander Vladimirovich, Doctor of Philosophy, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of Ontology and Theory of Cognition of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of the Dissertation Council. Other members of the Dissertation Council were appointed with the same order, and let me introduce them to you. Savchuk Valery Vladimirovich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Cultural Studies, Philosophy, Culture and Aesthetics of St. Petersburg University. Shipovalova Lada Vladimirovna, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Head of the Department of Philosophy of Science and Technology of St. Petersburg University. Serkova Vera Anatolievna, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Department of Social Sciences, Institute of Humanities, St. Petersburg Polytechnic University of Peter the Great. Soboleva Maya Evgenievna, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Extraordinary Professor of Philips Marburg Universität, Germany. In the remote interactive mode, we have Nikonenko Sergei Vitalyevich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Ontology and Theory of Cognition of Institute of Philosophy of St. Petersburg University. Sergei Vitalyevich, can you see and hear us? Yes. Thank you, Alexander Vladimirovich. I can see and hear you well. Thank you. And the degree applicant, Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich, is also present. Also, in the remote access mode, we have the academic advisor of the applicant, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, acting as head of the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture of St. Petersburg University, Sokolov Evgeny Georgievich. In order to improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues, working in the remote access mode, please switch off your microphones, but remember to turn them on when they are given the floor to avoid any unnecessary interruptions. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast live at St. Petersburg University website. Since we all speak the same language, we don't need translation, but during the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council session, an email is currently displayed to which all the listeners may send their questions to the applicant or express their opinions related to the thesis content and the applicant's speech, the ongoing scientific discussion, and thus take part in the scientific discussion. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical services, and I shall present them during our discussion. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of the thesis. It's necessary to include full name, position, and place of employment of the author of the question. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion and discussion of the thesis and assessment of the thesis and unanimous questions shall not be presented. According to the order of awarding degrees at St. Petersburg University of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter referred to as the order, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the appointed members are present, but not less than 4 persons. At the moment, all the council members are present, in all 6, including 1 council member in the remote interactive mode. With him, as we already know, audio and visual contact has been established. Thus, we have the quorum, and I invite the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, also curator of today's defense, to make up the attendance list. I can continue, right? Well, colleagues, so what do we start with establishing the procedure of today's session, with total duration of approximately 3 hours. Summary report of the chairman about the applicant and documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with applicable regulations. Answers to possible questions should not take more than 5 minutes. Summary report of the applicant outlining the key findings of his research. Approximately 20 minutes. Boris, Vasilyevich, you don't mind, do you? Excellent. Questions to the applicant. No more than 2 minutes for each question. Answers of the applicant should not take more than 5 minutes for all the questions. Speeches of all the council members in turn with their assessment of the thesis. The applicant's speech, questions and suggestions to the applicant. Approximately 10 minutes for each speaker. Speech of the chairman of the Dissertation Council. Approximately 10 minutes as well. Answers of the applicant to questions and comments of the council members, not more than 20 minutes. Open discussion. Speeches at will of the attendees with summaries of their opinion, no more than 2 minutes for each speaker. I formally have to inform those, please register themselves in the registration sheet and introduce yourself fully before speaking. Give your name of next questions sent during the discussion and during the live broadcast of the session at St. Petersburg University website. Please remember the questions, presentation of which takes over 2 minutes, should not be presented. Answers of the degree applicant. Speech of the academic advisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. Discussion with the council member before open individual of the defense results. For that period, sound shall be switched off. Open individual voting, and the chairman shall count the votes, and results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, as well as making decision awarding, not awarding the degree, and closing remarks of the applicant, not, if any, not more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have questions or objections to this procedure? Accepted. If no one has any objections, let us start. First of all, traditionally, let me ask you to turn your mobile phones off. Dear colleagues working in, please keep your phones on so that we could reach you quickly in case of any emergency. If during, if there are any interruptions or emergencies, we'll have to announce a technical break. So we'll inform you. So if you need to leave the room for any reason, please inform me. Contact me, Ekaterina Vyacheslawna, who is also, so we will announce technical breaks. Well, Let's start the session. Before I give the floor to the applicant, I have to present a number of points about the applicant and his thesis. Present my summary report. The thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571 Ontology and Theory of Cognition, on the theme Conflict, Analytics, Ontological and Epistemological Aspects, was accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, dated the 5th of August 2021, number 7811/1. Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich wrote his thesis at St. Petersburg University
Коллеги.
I beg your pardon, colleagues.
Я прошу меня извинить.
I beg your pardon. As automatic Institute of Political Studies in Belgrade, Serbia. I beg your pardon once again. The academic advisor is Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, acting as head of the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture, St. Petersburg University, Sokolov Evgeny Georgievich. The number of publications of the applicant, which set off the key scientific results of the thesis, according to the enclosed list, is 15 publications in journals. From the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education of Russian Federation, 15 publications. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to information are received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are also available from the Dissertation Council Activities Support Department, who is now present. Before I give the floor to the applicant, I have a question to the council members. Dear council members, do you have any general questions to the applicant, and is it necessary to review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? No. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. If there are no questions, let me give the floor to the applicant, and let me remind him that he has 20 minutes exactly. Good afternoon, dear chairman and dear council members. I would like to describe my thesis and the key points, the key conclusions to which I came. The relevance of my studies, the logic of the conflict in postmodernist epoch. Alone with significant changes in the cultural discourse, reorient subjective perception of conflict and simulate process of emergence of new conflict patterns in the social, political, and economic spheres of everyday life. In this regard, it's necessary to carry out a step-by-step solution of a set of tasks to build an epistemological structure of knowledge about the phenomenon of conflict and to integrate disconnected steps from anthropology, ontology, and cultural studies into a single whole. So, the relevance of this study is that it shows the possibilities of ontological, epistemological, and culturological analysis of conflict on the basis of its own categories, belonging exclusively to the I-in conflict in the philosophical sense. At the same time, it's critical for the ontology of conflict to develop its own categories and to clarify the question regarding the nature of time and space in this perspective. This topic has been extensively researched in the scientific literature, but the conclusions and opinions of the authors are really systematic into a unified epistemological structure of knowledge. For example, the introductory provisions for the formation of ontological conflict are in the philosophy of existentialism, the ontological problematics of operette of self and other are also well studied. Philosophical issues of presence of self and the other in every day are being elucidated. The essence of existential speech, thinking and location is further revealed in domestic and foreign studies. A wide body of information, the principles of scientific knowledge, from an epistemological perspective as well as in socio-cultural modalities is available. However, knowledge about conflict is not always ontologically grounded and epistemologically framed, which suggests the need for philosophical conversation into this perspective. Objective of my thesis was to explore conflict and the system of knowledge of conflictual being from an existential perspective. Objectives: to reconstruct the chronology of conflict theory, to conceptualize the ontological foundations of being in conflict. 3. To prove relevance of fundamental existentialism for the philosophical analysis of the epistemology of conflict. 4. To analyze the spatial and temporal framework of the conflictual co-presence, to develop the methodological tools to structure the philosophical and anthropological knowledge about the conflict, to demonstrate the higher heuristic efficiency of programs by means of which the co-presence of the self and the other in the conflict being can be neutralized, to explore the fundamental and non-classical scenarios of conflict existential harmonization, to analyze the essential and descriptive characteristics of the term conflict pattern, and finally to identify specific features of identity, axiological and ideological patterns in the contemporary conflict reality. In accordance with the aims and objectives of the thesis, its structure is formed, namely 3 chapters, the first of which is devoted to the conflict ontology, the second to epistemology, while the third deals with contemporary conflict modalities, patterns, and socio-cultural realities. The scientific note of the study is that the epistemological horizons of conflict theory are defined. The significance of applying the concept epistemological program in the structure of anthropological knowledge is substantiated. Definitions of basic existential I versus conflict are formulated, presented as the basis for constructing the ontology of conflict. Epistemological review of fundamental programs and technologies for neutralizing the conflictual co-presence of self and other. It has been established that the complex application of ontological and epistemological tools allows to systematize the philosophical knowledge of the phenomenon of conflict. The author considers essential characteristics of the term conflict pattern and reveals its basic modules into different socio-cultural variations. The spatial and temporal attributes of a conflict in the phenomenological perspective were defined. The results of the study are as follows. The limits of application of the concept conflict in ontological and epistemological discourses are established. Second, the fundamental existential aspects of conflict existence are identified and their cultural philosophic analysis has been carried out. Next, the anthropological features of conflictual co-presence have been identified. It's a philosophical expediency of introducing ontological and epistemological terminology into the theory of conflict. Principles of neutralizing the conflictual co-presence of self and other are formulated and the actual epistemological programs are considered. 6. The characteristics of the term conflict pattern from ontological and epistemological perspectives have been analyzed. And 7. Modern identifications, axiological and ideological patterns in the socio-cultural reality were studied. The main points are submitted for defense. First, the no ethics of conflict does not reach the level of unity of consciousness with unlimited variance of subject orientation and does not capture for the self the pure possibility to recognize itself in the other. At the same time, the no ethics of conflict implies transition of profile analytics to the level of systematic universality and discovery of the total unity of all elements of the epistemological structure. Second, the fundamental ontological foundations of being self in conflict containing knowledge are to be defined as self-consciousness of the conflicting ego, the singular and universal consciousness, of the subjectivity, reality of conflict, recognition of the other, envy of the other, impossibility of looking at oneself from outside, communication, the struggle of self-sacrifice, of bifurcation of conflict, suffering and violence. 3. Conflict refers to the multiplicity of ways of being self, that is, represents the ability to exist in a certain way. 3. Time appears for the self and the other as change and transition to a different way of being in a negative socio-cultural everyday life. That is, the initial temporality deals with factuality beyond the relationship between self and other. The next phase of temporality is the time of the self and for the self and the others. In these moments, the self is aware of self through co-presence of the other and signals the beginning of the coordination in the two opposing subjects. Each relates individually and both of them together. And also here should be said that the final point of the conflict is a renaissance of the I in self. The basic methodological principles of contemporary conflict epistemology needs to be defined in such a way that knowledge of self in conflict is linked to the activity of the subject, accumulating and translating this knowledge in space and time within a particular cultural variation. Next, the fundamental epistemological programs refer to the most general forms of imagined or practically embodied algorithm applied to change the conflict situation through transformative influence on the existential capacities of the consent of pair of antagonists. At the same time, the innovative epistemological programs are designed to neutralize conflicts in the socio and cultural space of the 21st century and offer alternative ontological interpretations of traditional terms, including punishment and look. And finally, 7. Conflict patterns are a systematic repetition of elements of conflict reality occurring with necessity, irrespective of variations of being in conflict. Patterns are strong evidence in favor of the anthropological sustainability of conflictual reality, as they reveal the epidictic characteristics in the foundations of everyday being that are not subject to change in the face of periodic renewal of epistemological structure. In the final provision submitted for defense, I said that the conflict patterns appear in all cultural modes and reflect the essential characteristics of the identification mechanisms of I in conflict, as well as indicate the axiological and ideological components in the everyday co-presence. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I am ready to take your questions, if any. Dear colleagues, thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Dear colleagues, we have the opportunity to ask the applicants some questions. Please remember, questions should be related strictly to the presentation, outlining the key findings and the content of the thesis. So please remember that we have 2 minutes per question. As I understand, dear colleagues, welcome. Sure. I have a question on methodology of your work. Conflict as a phenomenon is rather well studied and by specific sciences, and we have the conflictology department, and so they study the philosophy of conflict. So my question is about your approach. How you, so you've characterized it but have not defined it. How would you define your approach, and why you decided to use exactly this approach against the background of the current state of awareness? What are the advantages of your approach? Thank you very much, Maya Evgenievna. I graduated the Department of Conflictology of the Faculty of Philosophy, and when I was a student, we stayed in the framework of Marxist and Hegelian approaches. So this is the potential that we could use for our research and papers. And so normally we wouldn't go beyond. So back when I wrote my candidate's thesis, I wanted to take at new forms of conflict discussed in chapters 2 and 3 of the thesis: digitalization, the cultural realities of postmodernist era, because here in the foreground is we have emotions and feelings, and for that I think the existential methodology is very suitable. And on the other hand, this knowledge should be based on new rules or new here the Foucault ideas about the knowledge system can become very useful to explore this question. Thank you. So what you're trying to say, so I just want to clarify that the concept of conflict, is this a historical concept, and the nature of conflict, it changes with history? So this is my first question. And my second question is about the definition of the conflict itself. I don't remember if you have defined it in your thesis. I don't think there is no definition. So what's conflict for you? Thank you, Maya Evgenivna. In my paper, the conflict is defined as a way of I to exist. So one of the variants where by paying attention we can capture I and the other, because they are linked in this subject. If you remember the classical definition, so both want it, both want to keep it. So the subject of conflict interaction is where we see I and the others. So that's about the first point that we touch upon. And as for the fact that in the thesis I speak about the other types of conflict, here I would like to clarify for myself. So what exactly should I clarify? The definition of conflict is clear. For me, conflict is a way to exist. As for your second comment, it's historic, from historical point, using the word epistema. You said epistema means being part of history. So what are the forms of conflict? Or conflict is constant, and well, the way to exist, there are other ways to exist. Why conflict is a way to exist? So these are my two questions. Okay. Now I think, Maya Evgenivna, I think I understood. If we take an epistemological look on the conflict, we may see that throughout history, the forms that this phenomena has taken in different cultural modalities are similar. Yet, in every epistema, the methods of constructing knowledge are changing. And here we start seeing this difference. A conflict in different eras has been constant, because I don't see how we can go beyond its three simplest ways: peace, negotiations, and legal investigation. We can see this in antiquity, we can see it today, but this methodological approach allows us to identify some differences that exist there and that are present and will be present. As for the definition being narrow, I think it's too broad. Dear colleagues, we going falling behind, but I have to answer. So please finish. We have other questions. Thank you very much for your update. The thesis, in fact, explains the specific features of this. Indeed, this definition may seem not insufficient. So I would try to give my opinion like this, state my opinion like this. Thank you, Maya Evgenievna. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Lada Vladimirovna has a question, and I'd like to continue the question of Maya Evgenievna because she evoked me to ask for clarifications. When you said that the conflict is a way to exist, you sent to generic sense. Give the generic classification of the way to exist called conflict, and well, there are other ways to exist except for conflict. I think I'm starting to give. Thank you, Vlada Vladimirovna, for clarifying that to me. A conflict as a way to exist is best characterizes its negative nature, and in that I see the potential for developing this, because when you state something, this only gives you an opinion, and when we deny something, so we get loss of confidence, and conflict is all about denying the others and imposing our own way to exist by capturing this part of the others, of the other person that does not belong to him. And in that sense, this way to exist is unique. So, to finish answering the previous question, let me try and answer it like that. Dear Boris Vasilyevich, my question came from admiration by the extravagant thesis. I'm quoting: "It's impossible to overestimate the theoretical contribution in the development of the subject of conflict made by North Korean political leaders and ideologists. And as for practical, I could not find the theoretical contribution that cannot be overestimated, and this is given, and it's given. It comes under novelty. So, that's a conflictology. So, what is the theoretical contribution in development of the North Korean experts? I discussed this with my academic advisor, and in reality, if you pay attention to this phenomenon, I managed to attend the annual Church seminar in Pyongyang and made a speech there, and it was so interesting to me that I decided to write about it, because the North Korean thought, philosophical, social, political, maybe is not the only but the most fundamental mode of contemporary thought, where the entire existence is constructed through conflict. I don't know a single contemporary, even local concept where indeed any social existence is funded with conflicts. And as for provisions submitted for defense, I thought if I include this among the provisions, the degree of extravagance would be too high. So I decided not to do that. But I'm glad you noticed this, because I think it's very interesting. It's interesting to read about it. It's interesting to talk about it. For example, once again, I beg your pardon. Questions. I beg your pardon. I hope I managed to answer your question. The report covering the key points of the thesis, so we'll have time for that. Vera Anatolyevna, welcome. I have just one clarification about methodology. You said you're existentialist in your approach, but I found lots of phenomenological terms, and that is why here I'd like to clarify. Please use the microphone. Is it true that this methodology you used, have you actually used this methodology? And please make your question short. You can make your answer really short. This to reduction, temporary synthesis, and late Husserl, subjectivity. What exactly? Or is it just convenient? Was it just convenient? Thank you, Vera Anatolyevna, for the clarification. So I'll try to make my answers short. The phenomenological methodology is used in the paragraph where I try to talk about distance, space and time. There it's applied and is actively used. As for existentialist methodology, it's used. We're talking about the conflict self. So these are paragraphs 3 and 4 of chapter 1. Hope I managed to give you a short answer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Thank you, colleagues. The only person who has not asked question, apart from myself, but I don't have questions. I don't have any questions at this point. Thank you. Boris Vasilyevich, thank you, colleagues. Next, let us proceed to reviews to the thesis. And before I give the floor to the council members, I have to present external reviews received from our colleagues who are not council members, and totally we have 4 such reviews. If you permit, dear colleagues, since reviews have been published at St. Petersburg University website, let me only read the key points, questions or remarks. So I won't read all of them. Do you mind? Thank you very much. The first review that I would like to present, submitted by Belyaev Igor Alexandrovich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of Department of Philosophy, Cultural Sciences and Sociology of Orenburg State University. The author mentions relevance of the thesis and says that the author devoted sufficient attention to some aspects of his theme, of Kierkegaard, Husserl, Heidegger, Sartre, and Foucault, etc. The author of the review says that the study has all the formal features of doctoral thesis in philosophy, but the statement on full compliance without analysis would be premature. Next, the author mentions 5 points that evidence that the thesis has been written on a due level. So here this critical part is starting. I have to present, so first of all, the topic of the properly formulated. The are also valid. Second, a set of methods chosen by the author in principle comply with tasks. 3, information in the text of the thesis and specific summary conclusions. One part which is defined as results, and other key provisions submitted for defense indeed has certain scientific novelty. 4, the content of the thesis has some theoretical and practical significance. And 5, the results received have certainly been tested. And according with mentioning the positive points, says the author, we have to mention some points for discussion of the author's concept that call for clarification. So first of all, specific features of ontological analysis performed by the applicant called for extrapolation of knowledge. Traces of this method are quite obvious in the work. Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii, though in appropriate section, doesn't mention extrapolation as his method. Second, deep penetration in the so there's no question to suspect him that he believes that the term is now the topic is now exhausted. In conclusion, we can see hint at further direction of further studies, which I think the thesis would clarify the author's position on this point. Also, I would emphasize as the author that the critical remarks do not affect the overall positive assessment of the thesis. All mentioned above allow me to say that the thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich complies with the main requirements set by the order of the 1st of September 2016 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich, deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, speciality 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Boris Vasilyevich, you may answer the remarks of the external reviewers after each review, or in the end when I present all the external reviews. If all together, right? Okay, thank you. Then let me proceed to the next review sent by Ivanov Andrei Fedorovich, Doctor of Philosophy, head of the Philosophy Department of St. Petersburg Electrotechnical University, named after Ulyanov Lenin. The author of the review says that relevance of the study is obvious and interest to the problem is natural and justified. The work of Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich is a pioneer work in Russia and worldwide for topic approaches and theoretical presentation, and this is no exaggeration. Applied studies are numerous. In applied philosophy is a number, but fundamental philosophical studies are absent. Further, the author says that the thesis is a result of many years of the author's hard work, who studied his topic in detail, studies a great number of scientific literature studied by the author, and as for criticism, the author says as follows: if it is something we can blame the author, of course, but the essence is it's not so much about the thesis itself, or it's not about the approaches. Kabylinskii does not violate the discuss requirements of the thesis, specialty ontology 571, but to the problem field, and the answer which the contemporary humanitarian knowledge cannot answer is funded in such registers. The ontological conflict are not. In most cases, it's omitted or implied as solved. It's good that Boris Kabylinskii raised this question and attempted to answer this question. Perhaps the answer does not meet as any fundamental question, but by doing this, the author focuses on general questions and is not wasting time on specific questions. In conclusion, the author of the review says that the thesis complies with the main requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Next review was sent by Lugavoy Alexander Alexandrovich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of General Humanitarian and Socio-Economic Disciplines of St. Petersburg Law Institute, a branch of University of the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Russian Federation. The author of the review mentions that ontology of conflict lie in the framework of philosophical and general analysis. The author studies the conflict in detail, looking at different categories, mentions the structure, the architecture of the thesis, and the author says that from the point of ontology, conflict is seen as a way to explore the world, and says that when the author proceeds to the study of ontological foundations of existence, when I runs into, so in this ontological inevitability, I finds or doesn't find its relations to the other, the anthropological nature of the other is different in one way or another from his own nature. But the questions have a high relevance, high ontological value. The author can deal with contemporary literature sources, and so there are no critical remarks in the review. And the author concludes that the thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich complies with the main regulations set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. And the fourth review by Martysyuk Pavel Grigorievich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of Department of Inter-IT and Socio-Humanitarian Disciplines of Minsk branch of Plekhanov Russian University of Economics. And the author of this review mentions that in the thesis touches upon the problem of transformation of conflict reality in the modern world, says that the author of the thesis, the tasks he has set, solves his tasks. This factual material which provides solid empirical base to study the application of the concept of conflict in epistemological discourse. The author says that scientific intelligence and experience of the author, the skillful use of terms, the author's approach to scientific cognition, a good selection of instruments, of theory of culture. The review has no critical remarks, and the author then states that the thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich complies with the main requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant, Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii, deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. These are all the external reviews we received, and now I would like to give the floor to the applicant, and I will ask him to answer all the remarks. Boris Vasilyevich, please start. Thank you. Thank you. It's very flattering that distinguished professors have such high opinion about my work and the modest conclusions which I set forth. But then, on the other hand, it's hard to answer positive reviews. So I cannot say. So all I have to say is thank the authors for their positive attitude, and maybe answer remarks of Professor Ivanov that indeed there is a lot to explore or to study in this field. I promise to do that for sure in the future. Thank you very much again to all the dear colleagues for reading my thesis and giving high opinion of the thesis. Thank you. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Dear colleagues, I beg your pardon. No, maybe that's too early to ask about critical remarks, because the council members may present their critical remarks when presenting their reviews. So now we will proceed to that part. Council member will present and the chairman will present their reviews. Once again, the applicant may answer questions and remarks after each review is presented during our session, or he can take all the comments at once. If you don't mind, I would like to answer in the end. Dear colleagues, let me give the floor to Professor Sergei Vitalyevich Nikonenko, council member. Let me start. Since my review has been published, I won't read the part which can. I'll just mention independence and originality of the text. So the author has a position of his own of existential phenomenology. Also, I'd like to say that quite an impressive list of literature, including sources in the English language. I think that's an advantage that the author is using for the foreign sources. I think that subject is relevant. And now I would like to proceed to the drawbacks of the work. So first of all, scientific novelty 1 and 5 in the first provision says that the epistemological horizons of the theory of conflict have been, for the first time, in our opinion, the author refers to his teachers, to his predecessors, to all the literature. And I think before some epistemological framework. In provision 5, there is an expression as complex application of ontological and epistemological tools. So this provision is not sufficiently explained. It doesn't explain how the author, how the concepts of epistemology and ontology relate. The second remark is about provision 1 submitted for defense, page 12, where it's not clear because the language of a certain phenomenological school is used. And in this, so the following concepts are present: no emetics, no ethics, profile analytics, systematic universality. Since these are not widely used, and in this provision we don't get any explanation. Next, the third provision submitted for defense, page 13, contains no definition. One of the key definitions: I exist, which is not common in the language of philosophy. This concept belongs largely to the author, and there is no definition of the concept. And I think it's not sufficiently explained throughout the text. And finally, the final conclusion, page 263, we read that I and the other are disclosed as I in conflict. This category is mentioned in the text many times, but the author never defines it and never explains the need to use this term. Yet these critical remarks do not affect the high value of the work, and the thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich on analytics of conflicts, ontological and epistemological aspects, complies with the requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571 Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Article 11 of the thesis has not been violated. Thank you very much, everybody. I will finish my speech at that. Thank you, Sergei Vitalyevich. I will give the floor to the council member, Soboleva Maya Evgenievna. Maya Evgenievna, welcome. Thank you very much. I will maybe not read the entire review, but maybe some points. So first of all, start on the basis of contemporary knowledge of conflictology. The applicant is the conflict discussed mostly by political studies is a marginalized approach. This situation leads to the fact that our knowledge about conflict is fragmented, and this knowledge is obtained and as an external to the parties. As the author believes, only the philosophical approach to the study of conflict can represent this as one of the key and which is innate to humans. So he presents conflict as a way to exist. Given such a broad definition of conflict, the applicant attempts to develop adequate philosophical language that could define the conflict. not as a sum of its parties, but as a state that can be traced at interpersonal and cultural levels. For that, he represents conflict as an anthropological phenomenon rooted in Heidegger anthropology. There was the good part. I shall drop the description of the thesis with my comments and proceed to conclusions. The essence of the thesis, the idea of the applicant to describe terminology is mechanisms in the terms of terminology of subject appear innovative, but the value of such approach is not so much in its value for epistemology as the author suggests. I think the methods here work very well, but in ethos, in the attempt to humanize the theory of the conflict itself, this is certainly an advantage of the thesis, but it leads to certain drawbacks of the work in question. First of all, let me mention that if we start analyzing existence in conflict, the concept of conflict itself is diluted from simple disagreement to crime. See chapter 2, paragraph 4, the epistemological program, and the concept even includes revolutions, page 253. In that case, there is doubt that we may identify a common pattern to solve these such different types of conflict. Yet, on the other point, despite this wide understanding, the conflict mechanism is fairly narrow. The antagonistic relations, the struggle between one and the other. The author ignores other ways, including internal personality conflict, and conflictology has never moved since Hegel presented his model. So these 2 points, these 2 critical points, do not affect the phenomenology of conflict as a whole, but call for some finishing the details. Speaking of the work in general, we may say that the author performed his task and identified the philosophical dimensions of conflict, and I believe that the thesis by Kabylinskii, Boris Vasilyevich, on the theme conflict analytics, ontological and epistemological, complies with the main requirements set by the order dated the 1st of September 2016 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you. Thank you, Maya Evgenivna. Now I would like to give the floor to Council Member Valery Vladimirovich Savchuk. My review, I will try to summarize, because some things for a doctoral thesis is necessary as new field in science, and here this conflict is seen not in its specific scientific form, but as a philosophical category. So the author is inbuilt in concepts we are very familiar with, as contradictions, etc. And how is this problem resolved? There are different approaches, phenomenological approaches. I, as an expert, as a professional in digitalization, who is head of media philosophy, to me, of course, certain paragraphs jumped in the eye, such as digital voyeurism and digital exile. I agree that the epistemological program of virtual knowledge allow us to interpret traditional categories differently, such as view and punishment, page 170. Here is quite well conflict of digital voyeurism, its solitude and emptiness, quite well explained. Voyeurist is, isolates himself in the, but his sensitivity is not changed. As a monk who's trying to find God in being in solitude, but solitude of a voyeurist today is under question, because today every one spying and everybody's watched, maybe not by special services. We're talking about various perversions, pedophilia and molesting, for targeting, advertising. So every voyeurist on the internet is under supervision today. And this situation, in fact, is new. It only started. It got so which is now included in the description, which is now included in textbooks, and this phenomenon is called voyeurism. So somebody is watching, is always on stage, and somebody is watching. So everybody is recorded, or immediately is registered. So these are the positive points I would like to mention in Boris Vasylievich's work. Though the work is not perfect, and my first claim is connected with the fact that the author abandons the conflictological approach, does not define the two approaches clearly. On the opposite, setting the task to conceptualize the way to address the problem in the traditional approach, traditional conflictology. For contemporary conflict theory, it's very important to understand the algorithm of prevention and of conflict differences, which is the task of conflictology as such. The second claim I have already mentioned, why the theoretical contribution cannot be overestimated. This novelty just simply jumps in the eye, but for some reason it was not included in the section on novelty. So the author fails to see that this novelty is his own achievement. The third claim is that the author continuously, and unfortunately this changes the subject of analysis. He starts talking about the theory of conflict, and then about the phenomenon of conflict, the theory of conflict, and analytics, theory, chronology, etc., epistemological approach, enable to talk about ontological approach. The critical remarks, of course, affect the value of the work. This cannot be avoided, but they do not affect the overall positive assessment of the thesis as a relevant and study. The study is rather valuable for the entire complex of social and philosophical disciplines. The thesis complies, and the thesis by Kabylinskii, Boris Vasilyevich, is an independent study which has relevance, novelty, and addressing, it complies with the main requirements set by the order dated the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding degrees. Boris Vasilyevich deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Valery Vladimirovich. Next, I will give the floor to Council Member Lada Vladimirovna Shapovalova. Thank you. I will also, with permission of my colleagues, will only focus on the key points of my review. And speaking of critical remarks, I'll present critical remarks as they are, so I won't give some examples. So this study by Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii on fits in the field of philosophical research devoted to reflection and explanation of basic concepts, scientific conflict, knowledge of conflictology and political studies. And of course, such a study is now relevant because the concept of conflict at the moment and the phenomenon is becoming very complex, though its detailed explanation is not yet available, as not only explains how complex the concepts are, but shows how deeply rooted in human existence they are. Providing the description of the conflict, the author justly mentions its abstract nature and proceeds to its epistemological content, epistemological program, and explains two relevant epistemological programs of today connected with such an important context as digital technology. It seems that the description of these programs as digital voyeurism and exile is of a considerable part of the study. And in conclusion, the author describes conflict patterns, having classified them, and focuses on linking is fundamental, and the study is fundamental study of the conflict, but analysis of this construction of these programs, the practical component also gets sufficient. There's also mention a point which puts this study in line with most relevant discussions. Is the subject I in conflict, as the structure of subjectivity, the basics for theory that focuses on its study. The thesis by Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii indeed touches upon some relevant issues of philosophical justification of the theory and conflict, and this conflict it certainly provokes certain questions which should be seen as points for discussion. First, the reader is not always clear the insufficiency of studies which the author claims but never justifies on specific tests, examining specific approaches, traditional points of discussion, where research texts are used to justify tradition, that are used to justify the author's position. Here, I'd like to say that I doubt on justification, the ontological turn, though perhaps happened not in the works of phenomenology classics. The author fully ignores ideas of Carl Schmitt, Hegel, and Marx. With anarchism, only Feyerabend is only briefly mentioned, and there is no extended analysis of relativist and representation. They're mentioned as, and the idea of crisis of representation that the author mentions indeed is when discussing the theory of conflict. Not only Heidegger but and when talking about the epistemological foundations of the conflict. The third point, when appealing to sources is not always obvious. The author makes reference to sources without, so it's unclear how the text in the reference is used. In Karl Popper, Ekaterina Shishlova, Linda Sokol, Andrei Sivalnikov mentioned well-known texts, but it was not clear why the author appeals to these texts. Yet, as a unfortunate, in two prominent Russian scientists, for example, study Gasparyan appears to be he, and epistemologist Kasavin is feminine. And the final point is about possible doubt, the use of concepts as methods used. I'm talking about the concept of evaluative analysis, personal observation, temporary time, and the concept of thinking matter. And despite these critical remarks, the thesis should be seen as a relevant work, which has an obvious novelty and complies with the academic requirements, which the author's will for philosophic reflection. The thesis by Kabylinskii, Boris, Vasilyevich on theme and analytics of conflicts, ontological epistemological aspects, complies with the main requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016 on awarding academic degrees from Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Thank you, Lada Vladimirovna. I would like to give the floor to a council member, Vera Anatolyevna Serkova. Welcome, Vera Anatolyevna. Thank you very much. Since I am the last council member to speak, last but one, I beg your pardon. The chairman is special, of course. But anyways, I can reduce my review since some remarks have already been made in one way or another. So first of all, I will pay attention to the positive, the good points as a fundamental thesis, since in your thesis, the thesis contains results of many years of practical research, and this and involvement of the author in conflicts, it jumps in the eye how well his expertise and how familiar he is with the material and so on is obvious. And also, I think we should recognize the author's effort to join these layers of epistemological, ontological research. So here is the level and the problem itself set by the author. The scope of the problem, of course, manifests how serious he is, his research intentions are. And as a result, the author manages to produce a complete picture of the conflict existence that he approaches from different angles. And this unity is impressive, most impressive. And as for the critical remarks, everything that has already been mentioned, of course, in every study, we are always happy to so always like that. That's the way it will be. So maybe I will only mention the Foucault methodology, that the ontological methodology, which maybe creates certain contradictions in chapters 1 and 2. So maybe I hope the author will comment this. And maybe one more thing is specularity in the text. I won't give any examples because since the review has been published, and we'll proceed to conclusion. We should say that the author managed to achieve new results in the study of the nature of conflict. The thesis by Kabylinskii, Boris, Vasilyevich on the theme analytics of conflict, ontological and epistemological aspects, complies with the main requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the Boris Vasilyevich Kabylinskii deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, methodology of theory of cognition. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Thank you, Vera Anatolievna. And finally, as a council member, I will also present my review. And following the example of my colleagues, I will not read the entire review since it's available, just give you the key points. I think the thesis by Boris Kabylinskii starts a new trend in the study of one of the most critical problems, and the problem of is transformation of psychological, political, and social picture of recent past. The author tries to develop a common method, analyzes deep layers of the nature of conflict, and is guided by methodology, such methodological foundations that define the ontological framework. And with the positive assessment is certainly positive, I would still like to mention 2 points, clarification of which would enable the field to develop further. First of all, the phenomenological ontology of conflict with epistemology and of Foucault type. So here there is the risk of eclecticism of phenomenological and anti-phenomenological position, which may lead to some contradictions in the future. And second, even though the author mentioned that several times, so what is the difference between his program and the existing program existing in the framework of traditional conflictology? I think these points should be clarified, but they are not critical. So my remarks are mostly recommendations. And in general, I'd like to say that the thesis by Boris Vasilyevich makes a significant contribution to the study of philosophical interpretation of conflict. The author sets new questions, touches upon new programs, contributes the traditional approaches, and the thesis by Kabylinskii, Boris Vasilyevich, Analytics of Conflicts, ontological and epistemological aspects, complies with the main requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the degree applicant, Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich, deserves being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Now, I have to give the floor to the applicant and let him answer the critical remarks that made by the council members. Welcome, Boris Vasilyevich. Thank you very much. Alexander Vladimirovich, Vera Anatolyevna, Maya Evgenievna, Lada Vladimirovna, Valery Vladimirovich, Sergey Vitalyevich. Thank you very much for reading my thesis so carefully, given constructive comments and deep dive into the essence and a positive attitude. I'm very pleased that the points that seemed debatable and ambiguous were noted by you, which gives me a new impetus for research on this issue. I certainly agree with some of the comments, and here I would like to immediately the stylistic. I would like to try to explain in general. When writing my thesis, I used 3 books. Masnavi, a book of Fernando Pessoa, and Bhagavad Gita. So these 3 sources I used for drove my inspiration from these 3 sources, and so maybe it went beyond what was in my head and made the paper, smeared the paper. So I should be more critical. And as for the gender noted by Lada Vladimirovna, I recently reread Crime and Punishment, and Marmeladov's junior sex of Marmeladov's junior children changes in the novel. So maybe the author dictated the text and maybe he forgot. So what can I say here? Qualitative non-listened Bovi. So yes, indeed, when formatting the thesis, if I had the time, so maybe we would be able to avoid these mistakes. Next, let me explain my position, and let me start to comment on so first of all about the literature. Indeed, I don't use a number of important sources on this subject, in particular the works of Hegel, Marx, neo-Kantian works, as well as the works of such distinguished researchers as Bibikhin, Kharuzhev, Porshnev. So this was done on purpose, as partly this problem has already been converted in my candidate's thesis. So that's why I mentioned something already known. I should have given further in the provisions the fund already used at the Department of Conflictology in the development of academic disciplines, as well as the academic articles of faculty, their monographs and conference proceedings. And since the approaches are often used in scholarly discourse on conflict, I have deliberately not reproduced them in this at this stage of the philosophical discourse on conflict. Further, I have to agree with criticism of mixing the phenomenological and anti-phenomenological is fully justified. At the same time, in the thesis, it emerges from the knowledge about conflict, its disjointedness and multivariative nature. Therefore, the thesis presents studies that are difficult to relate to the philosophical nature of conflict being, but there's a need for them, because ignoring the cultural modalities and particular cases of conflict tension in the modern society discourse does not allow to fully cover the subject and the study and to structure the ideas about it in a harmonious way. Regarding the terms used in the thesis, let me explain that I had to work with unstructured terms, so I had to combine terms from different systems and somehow connect them in order to express the meaning of what is being talked about. I'm aware of the fact that the vocabulary and concepts I have proposed may look clumsy and even not always be correct, but I was guided by the desire to find the right concepts and categories. Further, let me answer. Dear Alexander Vladimirovich, the conflict resolution programs in the thesis are studied from a theoretical methodological point of view, so the author's own developments regarding the change in existing practice are not presented in this work, although I have my own position on the effective resolution of interpersonal disputes and conflicts, which I would like to do in the foreseeable future from a practical point of view of private counsel in Vera Anatolyevna. In the question about the distinction between being, as you said, is between being and being, the ontic and ontological, I understand that I should consider this phenomena in more detail and at greater length, at the same time quoting Heidegger's interpretation. Everything would be clear. At the same time, this issue is given some attention in paragraphs 2 and 3 of the first chapter of the thesis. Dear Maya Evgenievna, it's true that I wanted first and foremost to humanize the general theory of conflict and to draw the attention of the community to the possibilities of such research abroad. So it's a pleasure for me that you identified this as the main advantage of my thesis. When starting this plan, I understood that there would be some distortions. Still, I believe that only conflictual being can and should be the starting point for the ontological discourse on the essence of this phenomenon. So patterns cannot be particularities, because they are general regularities that repeat steadily and regularly. I don't think we should resort to reductions and contractions here, but try to find the broader horizons of meaning. Regarding the comment about the narrowness of the conflict mechanics discussed, I would like to clarify that I have tried to go beyond this limitation, although I now see that this issue needs to be revised in more detail in the future. Here, in the beginning, I wanted to give you an example from my own student experience when a student, and the question about Hegel and Marx already been asked. So I will stop. Dear Lada Vladimirovna, as I already said about the style and the methodological issues, indeed is a shame that in the course of our discussion we couldn't take this issue to a higher level, conceptual level, but still I'd like to react concerning time and space. As you justly point out, the complexity of these issues. Indeed, I agree that I did not pay enough attention, only one paragraph, and a lot more should be said, because this is a very complex question that requires careful study. And here it's just, dear Valery Vladimirovich, as I already said, as I have already reacted to the North Korean issues and some methodological inaccuracies, but I would like, since you mentioned that recently in your speech about the digitalization, well, indeed, it's a very interesting phenomenon, because the viewer can go beyond the inability to see himself as an active subject. And that is why here it's very interesting. There's very interesting examples from the point of research paradigm, and here that should be discussed in more detail. And I'll just briefly touched. I have only briefly touched in the profile studies, which appear that may have some potential here. Dear Sergei Vitalyevich, I agree that the epistemological horizons of the conflict theory have been defined clearly, but still formulating this point of novelty of my thesis, I'd like to say that my work still clarifies some aspects and tries to adapt the knowledge of conflict to the modern socio-cultural realities, as well as to define some ontological characteristics of the phenomenon in question. So in doing so, I had to be more careful with the wording, not to cause any ambiguities. At that, speaking about the complex integrated application of ontological and epistemological instruments, it seems to me that this attempt to join chapters 1 and 2 should allow me to develop discursive a priori for the construction. And as for the terms I mentioned, I answered this comment already, so I won't dwell more on this. Otherwise, I will have to repeat what I have already said. And in conclusion, I would like to thank dear Alexander Vladimirovich, Vera Anatolovna, Maya Evgenievna, Lada Vladimirovna, Valery Vladimirovich, and Sergei Vitalyevich for their professional, attentive, and friendly attitude to my thesis. I hope that I managed to answer comments, remarks, and questions, and I'm of course ready to give more detailed answers and discuss. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Dear colleagues, are you all satisfied with the applicant's answers? After I present a review of the academic advisor, we will have time to ask questions to Boris Vasilyevich. Right now, it's only a yes, we are quite satisfied. Thank you, colleagues. And since we have not received any questions during our session, and as the session has been broadcast live, we received no questions. And since we don't have any attendees willing to speak, I will proceed to the review of the academic supervisor of the applicant, who for medical reasons could not attend the session. The relevance of the thesis by Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich hardly needs any justification. The world today has lots of conflicts that describe the situation along with digitalization in IT and so on. Attention of scientists to this problem is justifiable. Institutionalization of conflictology as an independent science, which is happening right now, is good evidence to that. The philosophical sciences that focus on the fundamentals of conflictology are very cautious, as well as other contemporary theme markers. The work of Boris Vasilyevich is a pioneering work in terms of approaches and theoretical presentation, not only in Russia but worldwide, and this is no exaggeration. Applied research studies in conflictology are many, but fundamental philosophical research are non-existent. The thesis is a result of many years of work is a researcher or a practitioner, the author who could take a look at the phenomenon. The conflictology department of the Faculty of Philosophy, now the Institute of Philosophy of St. Petersburg University. He is a lecturer in conflictology in more than 10 international universities, European, Asian, and American. Intellectual prowess and the ability to conduct expertise of events and identify general analyze events. So these are skills without which the applicant possesses. So the conclusions in the thesis are convincing and well justified. The structure of the thesis is also well justified from reviewing the phenomenological problems through analysis of cognitive strategies where conflict can be understood as epistemology of conflict, chapter 2. Characteristics of most important of modeling of epistemological models and conflict patterns, and axiological is chapter 3 of conflict patterns. Thus, the scope of horizon, the theosophical theory is and a priori on the level of applied research can be as a positive philosophical knowledge, which is the super task of the thesis, joining together the of pre and post is a priority of a certain nature, of gnoseological and epistemological nature, and the basic and another important point, which especially was not put in a separate section, is the is linking these spaces. The theoretical clarity is so these are the advantages of creating a sound philosophical theory of conflict, considering the absence of recognized predecessors. This is a difficult task, and the author manages to cope with it more or less. And so what can we blame the author for? Of course, but the critical remarks not to the style of the author, not to all approaches. Kabylinskii does not violate the discourse of the doctoral thesis, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. And the main question which the modern positive humanitarian knowledge is how founded on very different levels the ontological conflict. In most cases, most is missed or deemed as decided. Boris Vasilyevich raises this question and tries to answer this question. The answer may not be satisfactory as any fundamental answer to any fundamental question, but the author focuses on fundamental questions rather than peculiar specific features. So the author, the thesis corresponds to the qualification requirements, and its author, Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich, deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Russian Philosophy of Culture, Head of the Department of the Institute of Philosophy, Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov. Next, dear colleagues, it's time for us time for scientific discussion. You may now give your opinion or maybe ideas, ask additional questions to the applicant. So please feel free to discuss. Evgeny, you have any questions? Thank you very much. I will probably go back to the text of the thesis it seems that the question has already been asked. Please, yes, sorry. I'll go back to the text of the thesis, and the question is: the logic of your work, or I would say the phenomenology of conflict, has two poles. As you said, no emetic angle or frame in the logic of conflict. So these terms you use in a very special way. And I would like to ask you, so what meaning, what do you mean by these terms, and what profit, so what are you getting by putting your phenomenology of conflict in such a rigid frame? Thank you for Evgenia for this question. Despite the fact that in this you may see some ambiguities, ambiguous meanings. Conflict in no ethical sense is the point when we start thinking about the very possibility. From the point of research, we are interested to know how the conflict existent is possible, but on the emetic level is the level on which subjective experiences are based. First of all, I should talk about experiences, and the entire range of concepts that includes existential anxiety, inability to identify the other, and so on. So for me personally, this division is useful methodologically, because it enables me to define what we with great caution would call metaphysical understanding, and what we would call as immediate of conflict existence in some cultural modices. So that's what I tried in my thesis by using these two terms. Thank you. Thank you, Maya Evgenievna. Who else would like to ask questions? May I? Vera Anatolievna? Boris Vasilyevich, you are an expert in conflictology. What's your opinion? Can we approach it in such a way as to provide specific recommendations that would stop all conflicts, or it's such a field that this is not going to happen? So the studies, the metaphysical studies. So what is the point of such studies? Thank you, Vera Anatolievna, for this question. It seems to me, and I'm trying to advocate my point of view, that conflicts will always have conflicts, because it's one of the methods to identify the other. And as it seems to me that we have even a more awkward question, such as awkward death or loneliness, and in order not to face these questions, a man is ready to undertake any activities rather than answer the questions, the answers to which are difficult or unsatisfactory or frightening. And so the softest attitude to this we can offer and choose is just choose the lesser evil, the being concerned with own existence. So this is one of the forms of the ways to escape from what we are really very much concerned with, truly concerned about. I think that's what I think. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Thank you, Vera Anatolievna. More. I have another question. As for your concept of conflict, it seems to me that conflict is a fairly new concept. Could you please tell me when it became, when they started to use it, and is it okay to use it retrospectively to the events of the past? Of course, we know that a war, but can this war be presented as conflict, or a conflict has some special meaning, and so we have to be careful with it? So there is some kind of, so when we can, or when we when can, and when there a situation we cannot apply. Thank you. Thank you, for Evgenievna, for your question. Indeed, the concept of conflict in humanitarian knowledge appeared, maybe I could say in the 19th century, and so the term is quite it has been accepted since then. But here, what I'm trying to propose the following: if we take the main existential line and sum it up in one sentence, so what do we get? We see that a man in conflicting mood has conflicting thoughts, uses conflicting language, and in that later he manifests himself through certain actions. But won't this order be universal for any episteme in the Middle Ages or in the 20th century? Was it different ever? It has always happened this way, and so this is my main claim. By trying to look at conflict existence with universal, to try to stretch this thread that will work and reflect situation regardless of a cultural aspect. So that's how I personally see it. I hope I managed to communicate my idea properly. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. Dear colleagues, do you have more? Is anybody else willing to speak or ask questions? Thank you. Dear colleagues, let's take a technical break. Number 1, 15:56.
уважаемые коллеги, технический.
Dear colleagues, so technical break is over. 3 minutes past 4 Moscow time. Let us continue our session, discussion and accepting questions. Before we conclude and vote, let me ask all the council members and the degree applicant if council members and the degree applicant have any remarks or questions regarding the procedure, especially considering the remote mode access. Dear colleagues, please answer individually. Lada Vladimirovna, no, I don't have any questions. Vera Anatolievna, no. Maya Evgenina, no questions. Valery Vladimirovich, no. Sergey Vitalyevich, no, I don't have any remarks. Thank you. I don't have any comments, Emma. Let us proceed to the next point. Let me ask the council members, dear colleagues, we have the opportunity to take a break to discuss the results. When the sound shall be muted before we vote. Do we need such a break? Well, very well. Since we don't need to discuss the results, let us continue our session and proceed to voting. I will ask each council member individually for his opinion and independently. It's 4 minutes past 4 Moscow time. I invite each council member to speak. In Lada Vladimirovna, your opinion, if the applicant deserves awarding the degree. I think the applicant deserves awarding the degree, the Doctor of Philosophy. I beg your pardon, colleagues. Well, thank you, Lada Vladimirovna. Once again, I put the question of awarding to Kabylinskii, the Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 7571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. And I put the question to open individual voting. Lada Vladimirovna has already spoken. Let me only emphasize that by voting for, each council member agrees that Article 11 of the order has not been violated. I will quote 11. In the thesis, the applicant shall be obliged to refer to the author and or the source of borrowing materials or individual results. When using in the thesis the results of scientific works performed by the applicant personally or in co-authorship, the applicant is obliged to indicate these circumstances in the thesis. Let me also inform you that a decision council on awarding the degree shall be considered positive if at least a half, but not less than 3 members of the council voted for it, according to Article 17 of the regulation and awarding degrees candidate and doctor of science at Petersburg University. Annex 2 to order dated the 9th of November 2021, number 11. Lada Vladimirovna has already voted, so she confirms her opinion. Yes, I do. Thank you. Vera Anatolievna Serkova, council member, your opinion? Yes, I think the applicant, Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich, deserves awarding the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition. Article 11 has not been violated, or the order has not been violated. Thank you. Soboleva Maya Evgenina, council members, your opinion, please. As a matter of fact, dear colleagues, dear applicant, there was a period when you were answering questions, when I had some doubt about such positive opinion, but in the end I decided that maybe, considering that the fact that the applicant said that he accepts criticism and he's ready to develop and work on this theme, yes, he deserves. I think he deserves, and I think his Article 11 is also. Thank you. Valery Vladimirovich, Council Member. Valery Vladimirovich Savchuk, the floor is yours. Though I didn't get sufficient explanation of Korean theoreticians, I will be happy to see their theoretical contribution, and especially the practical realization of the theory of conflict. Hopefully the author will do so in the future. I believe that Boris Vasilyevich deserves awarding the degree, and Article 11 has not been violated. Sergei Vitalyevich Nikonenko. Yes, I believe that Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich deserves to be awarded, and Article 11 has not been violated. So I vote for. Thank you, Sergei Vitalyevich. And me, as the chairman of the council, Tyakov Alexander Vladimirovich, also believe that Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Philosophy, Specialty 5, Doctor of Philosophy 571. And I confirm that the Article 11 has not been violated. Thank you, colleagues. So counting the votes is easy. That way, out of 6 council members who voted, 6 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. Thus, the decision to award to Kabylinskii Boris Vasilyevich the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, Specialty 571, Ontology and Theory of Cognition, has been made. The decision is positive. We congratulate you, Boris Vasilyevich, and let me give the floor to you for your closing remarks, if you would like to say something. Dear Alexander Vladimirovich, Vera Anatolyevna, Maya Evgenievna, Vlada Vladimirovna, Sergei Vitalyevich, let me express my gratitude for this production discussion that allowed me to take a new look. This conversation will certainly become a platform for my future research in this field. Thank you very much for positive attitude to me and sincere interest in my field of study. Also, I'd like to thank the university, first of all, in person of the Dissertation Activity Support Department, for the opportunity to present my thesis. And I have to say, though, I have to thank my academic supervisor, with whom I have not only scientific but friendly relations, and thank him. Without him, today's success will not be possible, and I wish him lots of health. That's all I had to say. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Boris Vasilyevich. On behalf of the Dissertation Council, I'd like to congratulate you on being awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. We congratulate you. At that, dear colleagues, a session of the Dissertation Council is closed. Thank you for your participation. Please stop broadcasting. Thank you.